Hey everyone, welcome back to ASM Track Tips. My name is Tomo Gorman from Tomo Coaching, and in this video we're talking about Watkins Glen International. It's one of the most famous road courses in the United States. Everything from Formula One to NASCAR, every sports car series you can think of has come here at some point in its history, and it's one of my personal favorites. It's appropriately in Watkins Glen, New York, up in the Finger Lakes region. It's just about 2.5 miles long with 11 corners plus a bus stop, and it's one of the highest speed tracks, one of the highest grip surfaces that you'll ever find, and it is a ton of fun, so we'll jump into some tips. So here we have our overhead track map of Watkins Glen International, and as an overarching note before we jump into the track itself, this track has recently been repaved in the last 5 years or so as of the filming of this video anyway, and it's extremely high grip. One of the highest grip surfaces that you'll find anywhere, so much so that you can often go faster than you realize because you're hitting the grip limit that you would find at other tracks, but this track has more grip. So you really can use a lot of speed in a lot of places, more so than you would even expect, just because of the actual surface that this track is paved with. So jumping into the lap itself, we'll come down the front straightaway to start the lap on the left side. The entire front straightaway is mildly downhill from the start-finish line towards turn one. And it kind of progressively gets further and further downhill as we get towards the corner. But down here into the braking zone, we should have a 4, 3, 2, and a 1 up on the catch fence on your left. Those are our braking markers. The first thing to note is turn one starts to gain on camber, starts to get banked more and more as we get towards the corner. You can actually see in the in-car video the horizon line kind of shifts and it gets more camber to the right than on the left. And what that means is we're actually going to do kind of a two-stage turn-in for turn one. And that's simply to maximize using that banking that the track gains as we get towards turn one. So regardless of your braking point, you kind of established that based on your car. Down towards the 2 and the 1 board here, just before we get to the corner itself, is when we want to start to angle the car across the track just ever so slightly to start to maximize that banking. And by just a little bit of a turn in, it's just a little kink towards the middle of the track. And then as we actually get towards the corner itself, we're going to turn in for the corner. So again, kind of a two-stage turn in. Just past the 1 is where we want to turn in the first time, just kind of guide the car across the track, and then as we fall into the actual banking of turn 1, into the actual corner, you can add steering input again to really hook the car through the corner. If you turn in too late and you just go for a simple single turn in at the normal spot that your instincts might tell you, you're actually underutilizing that terrain that the track gives you in this space. So it's a little bit odd, it's a little counterintuitive to turn in once and cross the track and then turn in again, but trust me, it works in this corner. Now turn 1 itself has a ton of banking to get you through the corner. It's just at the bottom, and it's actually at the lowest point on the entire circuit, just along here and also at the toe. But as we come through the apex of turn 1, you're going to have this massive compression where we go from downhill to uphill, and through the middle of that corner you can actually add a bunch of steering input right here to kind of hook the car through, and then the car will kind of naturally track itself out to the outside as the track loses that banking and levels back out. The only thing to note when you're coming through that big compression is to be patient with the power. If you're getting on power before the car compresses, you're liable to put the car into a push rather than to hook the car through the corner. So you really want to wait until right around that compression point at the apex of turn 1, and then you should be able to get, if not full power, very, very aggressively feeding power off the corner to track out. Now on the track out, we have a two-stage curbing and then a ton of pavement where they allow people to run off in races. But the two-stage curbing is important to note because the first stage is rippled, and that ripple curbing is at the same kind of banking angle as the rest of the track. The second stage of the curbing is at a different angle. It's at the rest of the runoff here. So if you actually fall out of the first stage of curbing with both sets of tires, you're going to lose all of your grip and you're going to go flying out this direction. So you want to track maybe left sides up onto that second curbing, but keep a majority of the car on at least the first stage of the curbing or inside, so you don't kind of fall out of the bowl that corner creates. Now we get into the iconic S's, which are actually pretty straightforward in most cars. They should be relatively flat out, if maybe just a little lift down here towards the bottom. But we do just kind of gradually bring the car from the left side of the track up across to the curb on the right, where the most significant rise will be right between turns 2 and 3. And we want to keep the car on the right side of the track until this curb ends, right where a little access road is right here for safety vehicles. And as we cross that access road here is where we can straighten our hands out and cross back to the left just ever so slightly to make these S's as straight as possible. Now in a lower horsepower car, you want to do as minimal steering input through this entire section because it's so uphill. You don't want to fight any more resistance than you already have. In a higher power car, again, kind of minimize your back and forth, minimize your steering input, but make sure your placement is very specific because things can get just a little hairy here at the top of the hill in a higher powered car. So in those higher horsepower cars, from that access road here on your right, you may need to exaggerate a slightly later apex at turn 3 to make sure that you don't end up in the guardrail where this pinch point is between turns 3 and 4. After you've cleared that pinch point though, it should be relatively easy to just power straight through turn 4 and eventually track out to the left down this long straightaway towards the bus stop. So now we're coming into the bus stop, and I'll clarify before I jump into how to drive the bus stop that the way I'm going to talk about it involves absolutely no mechanical sympathy whatsoever. So if you want to take care of your car, this may be not the best way to drive this, but if you want to turn a fast lap, this is absolutely the quick way through the bus stop. It just involves a whole lot of curbing. We'll start by pointing out the curbs we're going to talk about, and we're going to number them 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have the first curb, second, third, and fourth, and we want to use all of curb number 1, all of curb number 2, barely any of curb number 3, and all of curb number 4. So we're basically straight lining through the bus stop using extra curbing as much as we possibly can to minimize the amount of speed we have to slow down. So on our way in, we have brake markers on our left, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We also have a corner worker station on our left, just between the 3 and the 2, that I've found to be actually a very helpful brake reference. So coming down the left side of the track, pick your brake point out, but the brake point is going to be an extremely light braking point, and it's just to dissipate enough speed that we can come off the brakes as we angle the car into that first curb on our right. Wherever you figure out your braking point needs to be, the turn in to angle the car towards the bus stop is just past the 2. It's actually very early, and the goal is to kind of wrap the car just past straight at curb number 2. So we have, this would be a straight line between curbs 1 and 2. The angle is going to be just ever so slightly out this direction to cross, again, using all of the curb at curb number 1. As soon as the car crosses curb number 1, or before we get to actually, we want to be back to maintenance throttle to stabilize the car. So we're going to ask a lot of the car side to side through this whole section. We want to be nice and stable on the throttle pedal to make sure that the weight distribution front to rear is completely even. If you're still decelerating when you cross the curb here, you're likely going to cause more drama than you actually meant to. So again, make sure that you get your braking done light and early and get back to maintenance throttle as you cross curb number 1. Now as the car lands from curb number 1, as soon as the car lands onto that the track again, we want to cross our hands back to the left. If you still have right hand down, you're going to go off this direction. We want to have the wheel straight when we land and immediately turn back to the left to use all of curb number 2. And that's going to straighten out the entry of the bus stop nicely for us. It's also going to help us carry so much speed that you're probably not going to be able to hit the third apex curb at all. You might be able to kiss it just a little bit if you were really, really precise on the way in, but that's okay. We don't really need to hit the third curb much. We just need to cross the fourth curb completely straight. We'll have done all of our turning early. We can pretty much straight line our way out of the bus stop. And again, all of that fourth curb. So curb 1, yes. Curb 2, yes. Curb 3, whatever. Curb 4, yes. For a visual reference to help you through the bus stop, on your way in, try to focus on the second curb as you approach the first entry here with your eyes. And as soon as you land from curb number 1, be looking to the fourth curb. Try to help yourself get through here visually as efficiently as you possibly can. Last bit of advice I'd give for the bus stop, nut and bolt your car before you go to the track. You should always do that anyway, but it's pretty violent through there. So now I've gotten through the bus stop, we're powering across curb number 4 and very quickly getting into the outer loop, which is turn number 5. If you do the bus stop right, it should spit you out just about mid-track coming into the outer loop. And from the time you get to that mid-track all the way into the outer loop is a good time to start slowing the car down just very gradually. This is an extremely long corner with a lot of banking. It actually starts to descend about halfway through and go significantly downhill through the last bit of the corner. So what that means is the car gains grip essentially all the way through the duration of this outer loop. Having come out of the bus stop about mid-track, again, we have the first phase of this corner is where we want to slow the car down. It's a very light brake pressure, maybe even just a lift off the throttle, all the way to a point right about a third of the way through the corner where an access road joins the track. That's a great reference point for you to know that you're a third of the way through the corner. Because this corner is so long, it's hard to actually see and know how far you are through it. Once you've gotten to that access road is about where you can pick up maintenance throttle. You should be down to the right side of the track and just carry an extended apex through the middle of this corner before feeding the throttle or starting to track out all the way to the outside on the left, exiting the outer loop. As I mentioned, the second half of this corner does go further downhill, but is also more banked than the entry of the corner. So through the middle of the corner right here, you might feel like you're at the edge of adhesion and the car is starting to get away from you just a little bit. But the car should gain grip as you accelerate through the corner, which allows you to maintain your line, even though you're starting to accelerate and go quicker down this hill. On the exit, we have a nice friendly curb here on our left. We can track at least the left sides up onto it if we need to. I would try not to go all four up onto it. That's getting a little risky, but go all the way out to it, left sides up on top of it, and then carry that trajectory back across the track to set up for the laces. So now we're reaching essentially terminal velocity on the track and headed very significantly downhill towards the laces, which is going to be a pretty significant braking zone and all downhill as well. Now the only braking marker that I have for this corner is actually a little sewer grate that's right about here. It's on our right and it's actually a pretty deep brake marker. A lot of cars can't get all the way to it, but take note of it and at least use that as a reference point to back your braking zone up from. Otherwise, there are no brake markers through this section and you're going to have to develop the muscle memory somehow. So I'd recommend using that sewer grate just a little bit. Now the laces, it's really helpful, I find, to look at an overhead map and see what the angle of this corner looks like in the real world from overhead. And you'll see in the overhead map that it's actually an increasing radius corner. But knowing that it's downhill the entire time and an increasing radius corner, we actually are just going to kind of cut distance out of it, which means as soon as we get on the brakes and past that sewer grate, we're going to turn in and drive straight down to the inside of the corner where we're going to stay for most of the corner. So rather than setting up for a late apex, running high, or doing anything kind of to set up to get out of the corner, again, just dive to the inside, kind of cutting the distance through the middle of the corner, and way towards the exit of the corner is where we're going to start to accelerate. You really need a lot of patience through the middle of the corner. Again, it's a big extended apex zone, but if you start to accelerate through the middle of the corner, you're almost definitely going to run out of track on the exit here. So just be patient with the power, roll your entry speed, get to the inside, and then be patient to get a nice clean acceleration out. On the exit of the laces here at turn 6, we do have a curb on the right that we can use just a little bit. I've found if you're regularly using the curb or struggling to even keep the car on the curb, you're definitely accelerating too soon in the middle of turn 6. So we should just be kind of carrying gently out to that curb, just up to it, maybe just touching it with the right side tires, and then we're going to get back across the track. We're still going downhill, down to the lowest point on the entire circuit towards the toe of the boot, turn 7. So we want to be on the far left side of the track, and we have brake markers, 3, 2, 1, to use down for this corner, but because it's a downhill braking zone into an uphill corner, we can actually brake extremely late. Most cars I've found can brake towards the 2, if not the 1, but the 1 is actually our turn-in point. We're going to turn in very early, and right at the bottom of the track. This is our turn-in point. It's also the lowest point and where the track starts to rise up. And we're going to use the elevation on the way into turn 7 to slow the car down and hook the car up into the corner. So you can really carry a lot of entry speed here because gravity is going to offset that entry speed that you may feel like is overshooting the corner. Now turn 7 is also an increasing radius corner, but because of the uphill nature, it tends to feel like a very late apex. You're going to want to stay to the inside until right about here where you can finally start to track out. So on the entry, again, we're going to use all the elevation on the way in to really sling the car into the corner. That elevation should tighten you up to the inside, and we want to work our way down to a very late apex. It's going to be easy to end up too tight too soon. Beware of that. If you feel like you're just clinging to the inside for a long time, you can probably actually come in faster and use that elevation to let you apex later. Once we've picked up the power and done our nice late apex, there's going to be a huge amount of track to work with through the exit of this corner because of that increasing radius nature. You don't want to use too much of this runoff. If you're running the perimeter on the way out of the corner, you're using too much distance actually. So you want to kind of get a nice clean run straight off the corner. And there's a little bit of a nook right here that's paved extra coming off of the corner. You'll see in the video. We want to tuck the left side tires into that little nook and then get the car nice back onto the track. If you're fighting the car to stay on the exit of this corner, then you're probably too tight or too fast through the middle. You just want to be nice and clean and just gently use that extra bit of pavement. Now we're headed pretty steep uphill down the first half of this straightaway until we get to a crest and start to head back downhill towards the heel, which is ever so slightly downhill, but it does mean that this braking zone needs to be a little bit sooner than it feels like it should. So we have a 3, 2, 1 brake marker on our left again. Probably going to have to brake somewhere between the 2.5 and the 1.5 to get stopped for this corner, because that downhill stuff will push you deeper into the corner than you think. As we approach the corner towards our turn-in point, this corner is similar to turn 1, where we actually gain a little bit of banking on the way in before the track levels out towards the track out point. And that banking actually tends to loosen cars up on the way in. So the car from turn in to apex may feel a little bit loose, it may feel oversteery, and then on the way out it will feel pushy. That's very normal, and the main key with that is to just stabilize the car and be patient with it through the first part of the corner, and the second part of the corner is where we can attack the exit. So our turn-in point for the heel is going to be just past the 1. We're going to slowly bring the car down to the apex. Again, be prepared for the car to loosen up just a little bit, but trust that it's going to stabilize towards the apex. If you try to stabilize the car with the throttle and start to accelerate too early, the car will start to push early and you're going to run off the track towards the exit. So just be nice and patient, give the car just a little bit longer to stabilize itself, and then focus on a nice clean exit out to the exit curbing here on the left. There is plenty of runoff here if you go wide on exit. You can just let the car kind of track 2 tires over on the exit if you need to. So now we're coming up to the hardest corner on the circuit, turn 9, which takes us back onto the short course. And there's a whole bunch of circumstances that make this corner the hardest on the track. We're coming downhill out of turn 8 and then uphill towards turn 9. We have no braking markers and no turn-in points. Because it's uphill, it's completely blind with a wall on the inside, so you can't really see through the corner, and you have to just build some muscle memory to get through here. It really helps to look at the overhead map from the sky and see that the corner is actually an increasing radius corner, but happens to be blind and uphill. So it just makes it a very difficult corner to see. Once you've established that you don't want to be near that curb for the first bit, but then tuck up to it and increase radius out onto this short straightaway, I think it definitely helps you visualize how to approach this corner. But coming back to driving the car itself, the brake pressure for turn 9 is fairly light. You're going to do a fairly light and early brake pressure, and what I think feels like a relatively early turn-in to lead the car down to that apex that happens to be about 1/3 of the way into the corner. Then we're going to cling to that inside curb with a little bit of maintenance throttle before we can finally start to really attack the exit that will power us naturally out to the outside curbing. If you find yourself fighting to stay on track, or this outside of the track comes up on you quicker than you feel it should, you're probably turning in too early. And if you're struggling to get down to that late apex, or any apex at all, you're definitely turning in too late. So there's certainly a sweet spot. Just kind of play with how your turn-in timing is working through this corner, and I think you'll almost certainly, after a couple laps, end up on a happy medium. So now just 2 corners to go, both of them very quick with a short shoot between turns 9 and 10. In turn 10, you really don't slow down much for at all. In fact, many cars I've driven here just turn in and go flat out through this corner. But if you are in a faster car, you just have a little bit of a brake, very light pressure, and we're going to turn in just as you pass under the 1, which is a fairly early turn in. A lot of banking here in turn 10, which will add grip to the car and help you roll speed through the apex and then track all the way out to the outside curbing here. If your car does need to lift or brake for this corner, it's really just to set the weight on the front axle so that you can actually turn in for turn 10. You really shouldn't need to slow down much for anything here in turn 10. It's really about keeping that speed up, rolling through. As you approach the exit curbing, it's very similar to the exit curbing at turn 1 that we talked about, where it's a 2-stage curb. The rippled curbing first, and then the smooth painted curbing second. And again, similar to turn 1, we really only want to get maybe the right side tires out to those stages of curb. We don't want to go flying into the extra pavement that's out here, because it actually falls away from the track. You lose that banking and it'll just push you really wide. Coming off of turn 10, we want to keep that trajectory going off to the left to get set up for turn 11 as quickly as we can. And really the only braking reference or turn-in reference, anything we have to work with here in turn 11, is a tire wall that ends about halfway down the straightaway between 10 and 11. Any braking we have to do, most cars will have to do a decent brake here. Needs to be a light pressure and pretty early. Want to roll off the brake as we come into the corner, and then we really need to be patient through the middle of turn 11. Find your instincts will try to rush back to throttle so you can get back up on power through onto the front straightaway, but you really want to let the car kind of roll down to the apex and then pick up the throttle right at that apex curbing which tends to be a very central apex to then get a clean exit onto the front straightaway. So be patient on the way in. You're definitely going to roll speed with a little bit of brake pressure as you roll off the brake pedal, but don't get back to throttle too soon. From that apex to track out, the hardest part is tracking all the way out to the wall and getting the bravery to really almost rub your door handle up against the wall without overshooting this corner. So what I find is a good visual trick is just to look down the straightaway. If you need to look at the inside pit wall maybe, or the flag stand that's way off in the distance, do that, and then just work on your comfort naturally tracking the car out to that wall by opening your hands up. If you're dodging the wall by having a lot of steering input and just barely not touching the wall, but the car is still loaded when you get out to the wall, you're probably attacking the throttle too soon here at the apex. So you should be able to pick up the throttle nice and clean, start to open your hands up and power down the straightaway and drive the car out to the wall with your momentum rather than steer the car away from the wall when you get to it. After that, it's a short run to the start-finish line and we start another lap, so we'll hop in a car and see what it looks like. So now we're hopping on board at Watkins Glen and we're jumping on board with me in Eric Coutil's EG Civic, the Instagram famous machine itself. This is back a couple years before Grid Life Touring Cup, so it had a B18, about 180 wheel horsepower, 9,200 screaming RPMs on Hoosiers, a little bit of aero, but a really heavily momentum driven car, which pairs super well with Watkins Glen. So coming up onto the front straightaway, up under the flag stand right here, and now you can see the track starts to fall downhill just slightly. There are our first brake markers. We're going to pick up the first brake marker and slowly come across the track, then turn in. Notice that multi-stage turn in to maximize turn one, tracking out to the outside curbing just enough to keep the car on the track. And now we're working our way up the uphill S's, where you have lots of time to think about how much power you do or do not have, just kind of minimizing any steering input that you possibly can to get the car up the hill as quick as you can. After coming through turn 4, we focus forward towards the bus stop. And again, remember, we're using all of the first, second, none of the third, and all of the fourth. So we're going to get our braking done and turning in just past the 2, angling the car across the first curb, back to power to stabilize it, all of the first, all of the second, just kissing the third in this car, and then straight across the fourth. Managing our speed now down to that access road. There's a third of the way through this corner. We're back to power and relying on the extra grip and elevation to carry us through. Grabbing 5th gear again, well over 100 miles an hour before the brakes. There's that little sewer grate leading the car down to the inside, and we're just going to cling to the inside for longer than you realize, then tracking out to that curb. Notice how I barely needed to touch that curb. If you're fighting to get off that curb, you're working too hard. Now down into the boot, into the toe, we're using that uphill to hook the car into the corner, a late apex, and watch for that extra little nook of pavement right there. See how I just gradually work my way over into it to track out. Now uphill towards the heel of the boot, slightly downhill now as we approach the brake markers. There's our first brake marker. We're going to brake down into the corner. This is where the car might go a little bit loose, but then it will settle down and we're going to power out towards the outside curbing. Just barely kissing that outside curbing up into turn 9. Notice how we're going to tuck in just about a third of the way through that corner. Right there is where we were going to stay tight, and then it increased radius out to the wall for turn 10. A little bit of a break, and turn 10 in this car is flat out. We're just going to turn in just underneath the 1 and roll our speed through here, but notice how much curb we're going to use on the exit, not too much of it, and then right back across the track. A nice light brake pressure early, back to throttle through the middle of the corner, and just gently guiding the car out to the wall to minimize the angle of that corner. That completes a lap at Watkins Glen. So those are my tips for Watkins Glen, which brings us to our track scores. And first up, we have our fun factor, which I'm giving a 10 out of 10. This is as fun as they come for me, and I absolutely love the high-speed nature of it, the high-grip nature of it. It makes you feel like a superhero once you get brave enough to really maximize what this track allows your car to do. The elevation helps you have a lot of fun too, so 10 out of 10. Go to Watkins Glen. Next up, we have our risk factor. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. There's really not a lot of grace here at the Glen. You have the blue barriers on either side of the track with maybe a car width of grass before you touch them. So the only way this track could get riskier is if it were a proper street circuit. So yeah, you are taking some risks when you go to Watkins Glen. You got to be willing, if you're going to go fast, to take some risks. So lastly, we have our technicality, which I'm going to give a 7 out of 10 here. It's really not the most technical place. I think most of the corners are pretty straightforward. The hardest part is really being brave enough to maximize what the track allows you to do. There's a couple of corners, certainly turn 9, down into the laces, a couple of other spots that are a little tricky, the bus stop for sure, but in general the track is pretty straightforward. So my overall score for Watkins Glen is going to be a 10 out of 10. This one's right up there for me with the best tracks that I've ever driven. It's one of my top 2, I think, and I really think everybody should go to Watkins Glen. It's just a total experience, plus the pedigree that it has from all of those famous series and famous drivers who have driven here. And a little top tip, go to Seneca Lodge too while you're in the area. So that does it for Watkins Glen. We do offer driver coaching packages here at ASM and Tomo Coaching, everything from remote coaching all the way up to trackside private coaching and a whole lot more. So if you're interested in that, get a hold of us at our website. But otherwise, I hope you found that helpful and enjoy Watkins Glen.